Hello, I'm Robin Gibson, and this is your Harvard House Money Morsel. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the bell so that you can get a notification when we release a new video. I'm sitting today with Willie Pelser, Chief Economist of Harvard House. Willie, thanks for joining us and thanks for coming into the studio.
Thank you, Robin. I took a sip so that people can see there's coffee in there.
Yeah, we do get asked that a lot. Yes.
Yeah, true.
Willie, we've seen now, last week we chatted to Michael around the announcements on energy and, the president's declarations from that point of view. Now we see that headlines this week have really been about Eskom, a portion of Eskom's debt going onto the government balance sheet. Can you sort of guide us around that? And should we be concerned? Is that a worry from a government debt perspective?
Yeah, Robin, thank you. I'm going to answer it typical economist style in the sense of on this side and that side, or this hand on that hand. But this is not describing two different scenarios. It's actually just putting things into perspective. So let's just stand back and take a snapshot and say, nothing is changing. Yes, we're taking this debt on to government's balance sheet. We've been down this scenario quite a few times historically because of the Eskom situation. So if we then look at the stats and you add it, we were facing scenarios 2-3 years ago in budget numbers that debt to GDP, including the Eskom debt, were escalating at 85-90%. Some scenarios were actually at 100% debt to GDP. So under that scenario, one should be scared. However, and as Michael has described, there's a new energy plan, if I can call it that way, in place. So in itself, it brings a different scenario. A scenario of potential higher growth, whether it's 0.5% or 1% or 3%, I'll put it into perspective just on the numbers. And then also the physical size of this debt. Eskom debt comes to 398 billion. If one analyzes that, the true debt that's been issued to run the facilities and to build these facilities comes to about 159 billion in local debt, in the sense that us as investors could buy into. And then there's a portion of about 69 billion, which is foreign debt that Eskom went to the offshore markets and financed that. So the two combined gives you sort of 200 million. And that's the number that's been then pushed into the system and saying that this is what government will take on. We must also take into account that this debt, about 75% carries a government guarantee anyway. So a scenario of adding the debt, first question will be, what's it doing to credit ratings? Now, these credit agencies, whether it's Fitch, Moody's, and S&P, they've taken those those debt into consideration in analyzing their debt their credit rating for South Africa. And it's not just Eskom, we've got Transnet, etc., etc. So in the current scenario of our credit rating, to some extent, the Eskom debt is part of South Africa's debt. Yes, it's now a physical transformation. As I said, yes, we're going to face a scenario of GDP increasing. So back to the scenario we're talking about debt to GDP. If we add this debt now and we take the last sort of indications for the next 2, 3, 4 years out on government debt, the scenario was 72, 73, 75% debt to GDP. Adding this adds about 2 to 3%. So we get to a 75 on average, that type of thing. So it's not a risky scenario. If we add then that this whole energy plan will add GDP, more people employed, more spending, plus the whole construction sector, the GDP portion rises. So we get a bigger pie for that matter. So suddenly your calculation, if you do a bit of scenario planning, we will almost be back at the current levels of, call it 70% debt to GDP, which we can manage in South Africa. Yes, if we get a sudden boom in the GDP number, then it gets more manageable. Also, what we need to take into account in the current scenario is, despite the torrid times we're in, people say the consumers struggle, the businesses struggle and so on, we're running ahead on on government finances is on the income side of it. So if you add that in scenario, yes, one can play a lot with numbers. I think the message is we shouldn't be too phased with the headline numbers again saying we're adding the debt. It's been calculated before. The warning lights are there, but there is a plan from a GDP growth perspective and obviously the energy sector. So if we then add other scenarios in there of social grants and so on, yes, we start playing with minimal numbers. So yeah, we're not facing a worst case scenario doing this. I think that, again, newspaper headlines throws the doomsday principle in. Whoa, we're taking Eskom debt on. But one has to analyze the underlying.
Well, it's nice to know that it appears there is a plan, and certainly the energy plan is the most exciting one on the horizon. Willie, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.